Hello, you goofy pile of bones and electricity wrapped in a big flat organ. It's me, another organ-wrapped bone clown named Casey Katsaris. Did you hear the news? That Trump guy is gonna stop being president real soon. Isn't that great? Oh, and some other guy is gonna be the new president. What? I want to say his name is Joseph Dinbo? And not long after Joseph Dimbo's victory was announced, you may have noticed that Democrats across the country, including the lovable Joseph Dimbo himself, began calling for Americans, Democrats and Republicans alike, to come together and heal. Which is a lovely concept, and I think the absolute best long-term goal. And then there's the short term, like the next 4 years. And then there's guys like Bill Maher, who in a recent segment on his show expressed his belief that if Democrats endorse lefty policies, we're doomed to another horrific Republican presidency. And that a smart way to avoid that would be to try to appeal to Trump supporters with less lefty policy proposals. And quite frankly, I think that appealing to Trump supporters is, to say the least, not the best political strategy for the American left to pursue right now.
Why? Well, I'll tell you.
Now, if you think we should appeal to the humanity in every Trump voter by explaining in clear, sincere language the many ways they themselves could benefit from leftist policy, I totally agree. If, on the other hand, you think left-leaning folks should disguise their leftiness or even embrace the least horrible of right-wing policy proposals in some attempt to win over Trump-Smoochers or anybody else, I pretty much completely disagree. First of all, every Democrat politician who is widely known as progressive or leftist or social democrat or whatever label you want to use, they were all reelected in this last election. And several more lefty candidates were elected for the first time. And a couple more progressives might get elected depending on how the Senate runoff elections in Georgia play out. If speaking to leftist ideals is such political poison, why are all these lefty politicians enjoying such political success? Perhaps in some cases it's simply because they happen to be running in lefty voter strongholds. But then also consider just how many middle-of-the-road neoliberal Democrats got booted. Consider how middle-of-the-road double vanilla sundae with water on top Joseph Dinbo was able to win the presidency, yes, but was not able to pull off a landslide. Against a serial sexual predator fascist conman who now has a 4-year-deep record as the worst and most widely loathed president in history. This jelly-spined, namby-pamby, compromise first, stand for something never approach to politics is super popular with Democrats. And to me, it seems like a sort of toxic diplomacy. And more importantly, it's not working. Second of all, to everyone who wants to make a priority of coming together and healing with Republicans, have you ever actually tried to come together and heal with a Republican yourself? Have you tried to have an honest, open-hearted conversation with a Republican and reach some kind of deeper understanding of each other? How'd it go? I'm curious. By the time it was over, did you come together? Did you feel as though a healing had taken place? Because I have had many conversations with Republicans over the last decade or so, and my experience has led me to believe that Republicans, they're not so big on the whole coming together and healing thing. One might even call them hypersensitive, willfully ignorant jerk dicks who have been culturally homogenized by a comprehensive network of right-wing propaganda outlets into nigh interchangeable and nigh impenetrable automatons. Or, to put it more simply, they're just kind of fucking impossible to talk to. There have been a few exceptions in my experience, certainly, and kudos to them. But overall, I've found it's quite difficult to come together with someone whose beliefs are so often not based on any consistent system of thought, let alone empirical facts. And hey, maybe it's just me. Maybe I have a bad Republican magnet stuck in my butt. But I have many wonderful Democrat friends who are opposed to, or at least skeptical of, the socialist revolution that I would like to see take place in the world. And we often have conversations that can get a bit heated. Shit, I have heated conversations with fellow socialist friends. But they're nothing like Republicans. In my experience, generally speaking, Democrats cite evidence from credible sources. Democrats answer my fucking questions, honestly and directly. And Democrats acknowledge when I've made a good point, even if they don't agree with my larger assertions. Republicans, on the other hand, pretty much always make laughably bold claims with no evidence, ignore my questions, fail to address my points, say something hateful, call me hateful for pointing out that what they said was hateful, declare that anti-racists are the real racists, declare that anti-fascists are the real fascists, regurgitate a few more of the intellectual dark web's top 10 talking points, pivot endlessly, move the goalposts, claim that they could totally destroy all of my arguments, but they don't want to lower themselves to my level. And then they usually wrap up with some sort of evasive rhetorical escape hatch, like, I think your assumptions say a lot more about you than they do about me. Talking to Republicans is a fucking drag. I love you, Republicans. I really do. I love humans, and you are humans, and I want you to have nice lives, just like I want everyone to have a nice life. But also, you're just kind of awful. You're just kind of awful. I don't know what else to say. You just keep voting Republican. And the Republican Party keeps getting worse and worse and doing more and more terrible things to people here in America and all over the world. And you just keep voting for them and making it very difficult for anything nice to happen for anyone who isn't rich and white. And I'm clearly not alone in my feelings. Prominent American voices have been calling out the Republican Party for decades. The Simpsons, arguably the most popular television show in history, was comparing Republicans to monsters and supervillains back in the early 90s. And we laughed. Oh, how we laughed. The world laughed. And yet, thanks to all the government corruption with the Supreme Court and gerrymandering and the Electoral College and propaganda networks and Democrats generally being a bunch of pushover bullshitters, Republicans have remained a viable political party for decades beyond when educated Americans first realized they're scum. And yes, the Democratic Party sucks as well, but at least they have some decent politicians in their ranks. Like a few sincere people who are really trying to do whatever they can to make the world better for non-billionaires. And anyway, I'm talking about Republicans right now. Honestly, I question whether there even is such a thing as Republicans. Like at this point, isn't Republican just a nicer word for fascist white supremacist? Maybe that's too extreme. But if a person supports and defends and gives money to a political party that has worked consistently over decades to sustain and expand white supremacy and is currently attempting a literal fascist coup of the U.S. government, aren't they, for all relevant intents and purposes, a fascist white supremacist? Fascist white supremacist? Oh, just because I'm a nationalist authoritarian who thinks that immigrant children should be held in concentration camps at the border and thinks that trans people existing is one of the greatest problems facing our nation today and dreams of America returning to an idealized version of the past that never actually existed and to whatever extent seemed to exist was built on a foundation of exploiting people of color. You've got some nerve, mister. These toxic institutions, such as fascism and white supremacy, don't need anyone to consciously, intentionally support them. They don't need their followers to actually understand what it is they're supporting. They only need the support. That is how these institutions endure. That is how their power grows. And that is what Republican politicians and voters have actively provided to these institutions for a very, very long time, to the detriment of the whole fucking earth. Now, many of these Republican voters, no doubt, have totally not fascist and totally not white supremacist reasons for voting Republican. Maybe they're worried about feeding themselves and feeding their families because they're being crushed under the boots of oligarchs. And maybe they honestly believe that a Republican president will help them more than a Democrat. Maybe voting Republican will actually lower the taxes on their business. Maybe they've literally never had a thoughtful conversation with anyone who wasn't Republican. Maybe they're living in a small town, totally isolated and disconnected from everything but a wafer-thin slice of white Christian culture. Or maybe they just hate women. But Republican voters' diverse spectrum of intentions does not change the singular impact of their actions. Namely, Republican politicians getting elected and being put in charge of important things and doing terrible stuff. To anyone who voted for Trump back in 2016, hundreds of thousands of Americans have died as a direct result of your poor choice. And to anyone who voted for Trump in 2020, you have contributed your political support to fascist white supremacy. Which really does kind of make you a fascist white supremacist. I mean, you're a supporter of the cause, even if you're entirely convinced that you're not. And let me be clear, Republicans, I don't want you to feel guilty. I don't want you to suffer. I just want you to get it. And change your behavior so that in the future, hopefully, less people will suffer and die as a result of you not understanding things. And I know, maybe you're very kind in general. Maybe you do a bunch of other things when you're not voting that are very kind and good and help people out and maybe even help the very communities who are harmed by your Republican vote. But imagine if you met someone and they're so nice and they do good deeds for everybody all the time, just helping people out in their times of need. And they do some good job too, like a money job that makes good things happen. Like they teach goats how to deliver candy bars to children in hospitals or whatever. Somehow they found a way to get paid for that. And now that's what they do. And the goats love them, and the kids love them, and the candy is delicious. And they're nice to their friends, and they're good to their family, and oh gee golly gosh, aren't they just a super swell person? Are you imagining them? Can you see them in your mind's eye, smiling at you, waving hello, wishing you a good morning? Okay, now imagine that the same super swell person, once every couple years, they go to a building and they walk into a little booth and then they wipe their ass with their fist and punch a small child in the face. How do you feel about this hypothetical person now that you know that? Kinda sours your whole opinion of them, doesn't it? What do you think? Do you think less of them now? Now that you know that every couple years they take a stroll down to the local building and they go into a little booth and close a little curtain and then they take their clenched fist and drag it up the length of their hot, humid ass crack and then plow that exact same fist directly into an unsuspecting child's face? Do you sort of feel like their time-honored tradition of crack punching kids every couple years, it sort of makes them a bad person, regardless of how many goats they've trained to bring candy to other kids? And I get it. You probably don't think that voting Republican is as bad as crack punching a kid in the face. I would argue it might be worse. Because you could go out and crack punch every child on Earth, and while you would no doubt leave a horrific trail of weeping, pink-eyed children in your wake, it still would never make the Earth so hot that humans can't live here anymore. Whereas voting Republican will do exactly that. And even if voting Republican is not as bad as assaulting a youth with your ass-sweated knuckles, it's still super bad for almost everybody, including you probably. And holy guacamole, I really wish you'd stop doing it. I really wish you'd stop voting Republican. The Republican Party is the party of fascist white supremacy. And if you're a Republican and me saying that hurts your feelings, I get it. I really do. And also, maybe get over yourself. Because you know what hurts a lot more than some goofy bone clown on the internet calling you a fascist white supremacist? Slowly, painfully dying from a preventable disease called COVID-19, alone, locked away from your friends and family, simply because a plurality of hyper-confident, self-centered know-nothings marched their asses into voting booths across America and made a profoundly stupid choice. Sure, Hillary Clinton sucks in a lot of ways, like how she tends to be a corporatist and a warmonger. But there's no doubt that she and her chosen administration would have done a far superior job of handling the pandemic. Still, there would have been a lot of deaths, unavoidably, especially with a bunch of obstructionist Republicans and diaper baby Americans in the mix. But the death toll would have been radically lower. Hillary would have handled it better, obviously, because unlike sweet daddy Trump, Hillary is not a world-class moron. Recently, America's daily COVID death toll exceeded the death toll of the terrorist attacks of 9/11. And experts are now predicting that the daily COVID death toll could continue to match that of 9/11 every day for the next 2 to 3 months. A 9/11. Every day. For months. As someone who lived through the date of 9/11-2001 and the horrifying plague of paranoid American stupidity that followed, nothing makes Republicans look more hypocritical and intellectually worthless to me than to see so many of them who were so ready to go over to the Middle East and commit genocide as revenge for the roughly 3,000 Americans who died on 9/11 now turn around and dismiss a death toll of over 250,000 Americans as not that big a deal. To be clear, the U.S. government directly manifested 9/11 with decades of horrific foreign policy in the Middle East and beyond. Then, after 9/11 happened, Republicans exploited the tragic incident to make themselves more rich and more powerful. And now that we're currently facing a threat that has already proved itself to be 100 times as deadly as 9/11, these same Republican motherfuckers call it a hoax. I don't believe in people being truly evil, but if anyone is, it's Republican politicians and the wealthy ghouls who pay to keep them relevant. Now, do I think that Republicans possess the potential to be rational, thoughtful, knowledgeable people? Yes, absolutely, of course. Republicans, I don't think your brains are bad. I just think that you've been taught really terrible things so much and so consistently that it's become exceedingly difficult for you to differentiate between reality and fiction. Furthermore, I think leftists and liberals have the power to help Republicans open their minds to new ideas and purge their belief systems of old misinformation, and embrace the possibilities of the future. But do I think it's likely that we can do that quickly and consistently and on a somewhat massive scale? No, probably not. Not really. And I'm an optimistic guy. I'd love to think that every right-winger on earth will have an epiphany and suddenly see beyond their ego and their cultural conditioning, gaining an intellectual clarity that allows them to live a life that is more enjoyable for them and more harmonic with others. Not only would I love to think that, I want to make it happen. I'm a fucking socialist. I want everyone in America, including Republicans, to have unfettered access to health care and college and homes and food and water. And I believe that relieving Americans of all of that economic anxiety will help them to see things more clearly in their own lives and in the world around them. And I believe completely that we can make all of that happen. And we're not going to make it all happen tomorrow. And even if we could magically make all of that happen tomorrow, the healing of the rift between Republicans and reality will most likely take decades. And look, I want to say, I'm very privileged in a number of ways. But specifically, in this instance, I'm privileged in that I don't have any close friends or family who have pledged their devotion to the cult of Trump. I haven't had to watch their grasp on reality slip away as they consume a steady diet of right-wing propaganda like Fox News and Prager University. If you're currently grappling with that circumstance, that's horrible, and I'm sorry you're going through it. And if you ever see any kind of opportunity to have a productive, unifying, healing conversation with a Republican you care about, I strongly encourage you to seize it. Have that conversation. Ask them what they think and what they feel. Listen, really listen to what they have to say. Tell them what you truly think and feel. Maybe you can help guide them to a clearer understanding. It is possible. In fact, in your case, I think it's the most possible. If a Trump follower is going to listen to anyone, it's their friends and family. And if that Trump follower's friends and family have already tried to appeal to them and shown them the facts and shared their feelings and explained how Trump is obviously a vile bastard for the ages who has caused even more suffering and death in the world than your average U.S. presidency. And despite all of this, this Trump supporter still believes that voting for Trump was the right thing to do. And maybe on top of that, even believes that Trump is a savior of humanity? What chance does a random person have to pierce that degree of delusion? What chance does a politician with a big D next to their name have? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a Trump supporter is more likely to listen to a stranger than their friends and family, because with their friends and family, they have emotional baggage. In which case, hey, listen to me. But still, generally speaking, making a priority of trying to appeal to Trump followers is, to me, a fool's errand. What I think we're probably going to have to do instead is the same thing that rational, compassionate, educated Americans have had to do throughout U.S. history. Forcibly drag our most hateful and idiotic countrymen into the future, kicking and screaming. I don't know if you know this, but social progress has never been super duper popular in the United States of America. Most of the greatest strides we've made in terms of civil rights and economic policy were all widely hated by a large chunk of the American populace, and only widely embraced after the policy was already in place. Trump voters currently make up less than 25% of the U.S. population. And yeah, that's a lot of people, and that's scary. And at the same time, they're also very much a minority. Trump supporters are not half the country, no matter how much media pundits say that over and over and over again. We should definitely keep an eye on them. Of course, they're totally dangerous. If there's anything the FBI is good for, it's keeping an eye on right-wing domestic terrorists and even quite often thwarting their harebrained schemes. So definitely don't ignore them. Don't pretend they're not there. They're there and they're dangerous. Let's keep an eye on them. Let's be real about that. But should we try to bargain with Trump followers? Is that the smartest way to use our time and energy? Like, imagine you're living in a house with 99 other people, and 25 of those other people, they keep lighting things on fire, like all the time, no matter how much you explain to them that lighting the house on fire is bad. Not only that, these 25 people keep insisting to you that every time they light the house on fire, it's actually good and it makes the house better. And imagine that's been going on for years. What would you do? Would you try to appeal to those 25 pyromaniacs who keep lighting the house on fire? Would you try to compromise with them and be like, hey, I understand that you really believe in the benefits of lighting the house on fire, so maybe we can work something out. Like, maybe you could only light things on fire every other day? Or like, maybe you could only light certain things on fire, like things that burn slower than other things. Would that be okay? If we let you burn some things, can we all come together and heal? Would you do any of that? Or would you just get together with the other 74 people and go through the house and find all the lighters and matches and take them outside and throw them in the river? Like, back in the 1950s, when black people were fighting very hard to end racial segregation in schools, according to Gallup polls, about 40% of Americans were really not into the idea of ending racial segregation in schools. In fact, they really wanted to keep schools segregated. Oh, and oh boy, if you ever mention to them that you were of the opinion that we should end segregation, well, they got very upset about that. And they'd say that you were crazy and stupid to think that such a thing should be done. And yet, lefty-type Americans back then, as far as I can tell, didn't spend much time worrying about, how can we appeal to the 40% of Americans who are stupid racists right now? They didn't say, oh no, every time we say we want to end segregation, a whole bunch of people get upset about it. So now we can't say that anymore. We have to say something nicer that won't upset the racists. Oh, we can't say end segregation. Maybe we'll say, reimagine segregation? Or maybe how about make schools rainbows? They didn't do any of that shit. They were just like, fuck you, racists. We want to end segregation because obviously you fucking racists. And of course, it took time and protests and fucking shit up. And then in the 60s, the rich white people who owned the government were like, okay, here you go. Okay, you're right. No more segregation. Just please, if you could stop fucking up our things, because we really like our things. Really, our things, they're sort of our favorite. So if you could just stop, then that would be great. And we'll give you what you want. Human rights. And then those wealthy scumbags got right to work on inventing new ways to keep black people down without writing anything explicit in the law, so that all of the pudding-brained, reactionary, internet sad boys of the 21st century can pretend that systemic racism isn't real. But anyway, just 4 years after the Supreme Court declared that the segregation of schools and trains and buses and waiting rooms was unconstitutional, the number of Americans who approved of that decision went up from 60% to 66%. Partly because a lot of the people who were so afraid of ending segregation and were so sure that it was going to be terrible suddenly had to confront the reality that it wasn't. Sometimes the only way to convince an American that a good thing is good is to force it on them. And I would say it's sort of a moral imperative to do so when other people's lives are at stake. Right now, in America, universal health care has an approval rating of 63%, which is 3 percentage points higher than the American approval rating of ending segregation in schools in 1954. The support for universal health care is there. We just have to demand it. The opinions of dum-dums be damned. And I'm certainly not saying we should never try to appeal to people with whom we disagree. Garnering more general support for our cause is always a good thing. But also, maybe, sometimes, we should just say, fuck you, corporate insurance lovers. We want universal health care because obviously, you self-sabotaging weirdos. Because people are dying right now from American healthcare being a diaper disaster. And from so many other terrible, racist, sexist, queer-phobic, classist policy. But how do we do that exactly? How do we work to shove Republicans into the shallow end of the social progress pool? Obviously, continuing protests is a big part of it. Protesting in every way we can. Marching, speaking up, being loud, being adamant. More and more, it seems to me that there are a lot of people in this country whose deepest beliefs basically boil down to whatever I've heard other people say the most. And shitty right-wingers are going on TV and YouTube and radio every day and saying the same stupid wrong shit over and over and over again where everyone in America can hear them. Us lefties could do nothing else other than being way more vocal and way more consistent in the expression of our ideas and goals and desires, and that alone would have a huge impact. I recently spent a couple months phone banking in the Nithya Raman campaign for city council here in beautiful sunny Los Angeles, and I ended up calling hundreds of people all over LA's 4th District. And let me tell you, I spoke to a whole bunch of people who had no plans to vote for city council at all. And then I just talked to them for a couple minutes, and then they're like, okay, I'll vote for your candidate. Just like that. And I heard similar stories from all the other phone bankers in the Nithya Raman campaign. And then she won as a progressive Democrat running against a Democrat incumbent. And yes, full disclosure, Los Angeles is a hotbed of lefties, and Nithya Raman just happens to be a phenomenal candidate, which made everything a lot easier for me and the rest of the campaign team. Hint, hint, Democratic Party, pick better candidates. So, if you support leftist policies, talk about it a lot. Tell people you're a leftist or a liberal. Answer their questions, ask them questions, etc. That would be really great. And, of course, just being generally vocal is not enough. To get even more strategically specific, I think we would do well to take a page out of the playbook of Stacey Abrams. Her organization, Fair Fight, registered 800,000 new voters in Georgia, helping to flip the entire state blue for Joseph Dinbo. Huh? Joe Biden? Joe Biden's going to be president? Okay. Like, holy fuck! 800,000 new voters? That's amazing! Stacey Abrams and the many other passionate activists in Georgia cooked up this strategy and then went out and proved that it works. Do you realize that there are more than twice as many non-voters in America as there are Trump voters? I think appealing to those current non-voters is a far more effective political strategy than trying to foster an imminent and substantial unity with Republicans or try to appeal to their, more often than not, ignorant and destructive desires. Like, what do you think is easier? Convincing someone who's never voted before to try it out and vote progressive? Or convincing someone who believes that Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi are literal child-fucking vampires to vote progressive? Which is more difficult? Convincing a disillusioned former voter to get back in the game and rekindle their hope that we can elect leaders who will truly serve the interests of the people? Or convincing passionate, lifelong misogynists and racists to vote for women and people of color? With whom do you think you're more likely to find constructive common ground? This person? I don't know. Does voting really make a difference? Or this person? The Joe Biden crime family is building a tunnel to hell so that Satan can come up out of there and bite my dick off and call me a woman. You know the answer. So please, my fellow left-leaning Americans, pick your battles and pick them wisely. Don't listen to neoliberal Democrats who automatically spit out this "we must come together" platitude every time they win an election, not because they have any sincere desire to see Americans come together and heal, but because it provides them a convenient excuse for why, inevitably, they will sell out the American people to not the highest bidder. That's what Republicans do. Neoliberal Democrats are kind enough to sell out Americans to the fourth or fifth highest bidder, who will also donate some money to pandas or something. Who, me? I'm not a corrupt puppet of an oligarchic system. I'm just a great diplomat, reaching across the aisle so that we may all come together and heal our battered hearts. It's horseshit, political theater, a con that has been perpetrated by neoliberal politicians again and again and again. Don't believe them. And once more, to be super duper clear, connecting and communicating with someone who thinks differently from you can be a wonderful thing. In fact, I'd go so far as to say it's a wonderful thing far more often than it is not. And despite what so much of American political culture claims, it is not a decent, rational person's responsibility to meet terrible assholes halfway. There seems to be this popular idea in American culture right now that the reason right-wingers are the way they are is because left-wingers are not nice enough to them. And it's just not true. Right-wingers are the way they are because they've been miseducated, because very rich and very powerful people have worked very hard and very intentionally to miseducate right-wing Americans. That's the issue. Not that lefties aren't polite enough. Political victory is not dependent on us diluting our beliefs or our demands. If you believe in socialism, say, "I believe in socialism." If you think Black Lives Matter, say, "Black Lives Matter." If you want universal health care, say, "I demand universal health care." If you want rent and landlords abolished, like I do, say, "Abolish rent and abolish landlords." If you believe we should defund the police, then say, you guessed it, defund the police. Dare to ask for what you actually want. You just might get it. And if you do have a conversation with a right-winger and you think they're being a giant fucking asshole, you don't have to be nice to them. Just tell them they're being a giant fucking asshole. Tell them to eat a 10-foot turd. Tell them to go fuck a bucket of screws. Honestly, that'll probably, on some level, garner you more respect in their minds, compared to pretending like you kind of sort of agree with them and trying to trick them with camouflage slogans for stuff they hate. If there's one thing all humans appreciate, it's authenticity. And then, after you tell them to go fuck a bucket of screws, you can stop talking to them and go do something else. Like something that directly helps people who have been hurt and killed by right-wing U.S. policy. Like working to register new voters in red states. I looked over the current election vote numbers, and in 19 out of the 24 states where Trump won, the victor was decided by 500,000 votes or less. In North Carolina, it was just 75,000. Remember, Stacey Abrams and Fair Fight registered over 800,000 new voters in Georgia over the last 2 years. If we can follow their example and register similar numbers of new voters in even half of the states where Trump won, Democrats are all but guaranteed to take complete control of the presidency, the House, and the Senate. And if, at that point, any Democrats try to make up new reasons for why we have to compromise with the right wing, we'll know that that particular Democrat is either dumb or corrupt, and then we can vote them out the next time around. And then we can abolish the Electoral College and abolish gerrymandering and reboot the Supreme Court and a bunch of other cool shit. And soon the entirety of Republicans' political power will be eradicated. And then we can argue more about liberalism versus leftism, instead of what we spend so much time doing now, arguing about liberalism versus hateful, selfish, dumbfuckism. And then, eventually, maybe the US government will actually function as a powerful and efficient equity-generating mechanism. And then we can all finally shut the fuck up for a while and eat a sandwich and bang our cares away. Doesn't that sound nice and relaxing and better than all this politics shit? Like, do you think I want to be spending my time doing political commentary? I am a clown. I would much rather be talking about how when my bottom goes boom boom, that means it's time to feed Mr. Toilet. But no, because so many of the political talky people in America who go on TV and shit and do all their political talking just keep saying such gobsmackingly stupid things all the time. So now I have to talk about it, and you do too. Okay, you don't have to, but I'd like you to, please. Come on, the more we raise our voices, the sooner this'll all be over. Anyway, what do you think? Let's gab about it. And let's take action to support progressive, on-the-ground organizations like Fair Fight in Georgia and Ground Game LA here in LA and whatever progressive orgs there are in your area. Volunteer, give them money, spread the word. And if there isn't one of these on-the-ground progressive orgs in your area yet, start your own. And that, I think, is it. There's my unsolicited advice for how lefty Americans should approach the next 4 years of political action. And if you think I've got things all wrong and you've got a way better political strategy for how to obliterate the Republican Party from the face of the earth, tell me about it, please. Until next time, bone clowns of earth, stay bony and stay clowny. Oh, and smash that like and squish that subscribe and give that little bell a tender tickle. And never forget, I love you.
Ba-da-ba-da-ba.